All right, so today's session here is on graphing. We have a graphing tool built into ARM, and we'll just kind of walk through the different options and different things you can do with that tool. Again, the idea here being that you have a trial where we've filled in recorded data. And so I just have an example trial here that I've opened up. It's just got a couple of assessment columns that we can utilize to graph and show what's possible. So to start with, I'm just going to go up to the menu at the top that says graph and generate a new graph. So there's a short wizard that will walk us through setting that up. And so the first question is, what treatments do you want to graph? And so you can select on the screen. Maybe we are not interested in the untreated check, so you can click and select the treatments that you want, and they will appear listed down below. A handy part about this as well, and you can certainly type this if you want to simplify it 2 through 4. The order that you specify them or the order that you click on them on the graph will actually set the order on the graph. So maybe 4 is what we're interested in the most, and then I'll bring the rest of the columns in. You can certainly do that here on the treatment selection. The next question then, it will bring us to the assessment editor and ask which data columns do we want to graph? And so I'm going to start with the most simple example of graphing a single data column. A little later on, we will show how you can actually do more than one data column in a single graph, but we'll keep it simple to start with. So we'll just graph data column number 1. Now it will build some labels for us on the graph, and we can tell ARM what information do we care about, what do we want to have on those labels. And so in this case, we are looking at the assessment header. So what details, what part of the assessment description that we have really matters to us for this graph. And by default, I think it gives us the pest code, and that's it. So I'll just take the default. Depending on your data, you might have something else that matters. We'll see where that information pops up once we get to the graph. All right, so then we are brought to the graph options dialog, where we will spend most of our time today walking through the different options. And to start with here on the general tab, of course, you're selecting what type of graph do we want to generate. And so ARM has 3 main graph types that we can work on. There's a bar graph, a line graph, and a box whisker. And we'll go through each one of those. In general, thinking of kind of the best usage for some of those, a bar graph can be pretty helpful if you're looking at different products. To see how they kind of stack up against each other, whereas maybe a line graph would be good to graph out a trend. Maybe you have different rates of the same product, so then you're just kind of looking at that trend. So those are kind of two most popular maybe uses, just depending on the data that you are graphing or your treatment structure of what you're trying to accomplish. Either one of those can be used. Whichever kind of visualizes things the best. So I'll just start with a bar graph here, and you can see some of these options change just depending on which graph you have. Kind of just configuring different components of the graph here. In this case, it's which way are the bars going to go, vertical or horizontal, and how should they be grouped. In this case, we're just going to separate by the different treatments along our x-axis. So just looking across the different graph options here, actually maybe we'll start by viewing the graph. So I'm going to click OK. We certainly could configure all of the options and then view our graph. Might be simplest here just to look at the graph and see what we have so far. So let me click OK. And now our data is presented here in the graph. And so you'll notice our treatment order does match exactly how we selected it. So I brought treatment 4 over to the left, and we have a legend, a legend here over to the right. It's pretty easy to turn that on and off down here in the corner. So show the X-axis labels as a legend. If I turn that off, then we have all those treatment details here down below the X-axis. But as you can see in this example, I've got my treatment 4 had 2 different products. So the super stump, and then I also included the rate details. So it gets pretty long. And so suddenly we don't have a lot of room for the graph itself. And so that's why that option is right there. It makes things a little more condensed when you have the labels there. And now I certainly have room for a lot more text if I want to be descriptive with my treatments without taking away from our graphing area. There are little dots here on the graph. Technically, that's not part of the bar graph. It's actually this option, the other option here in the corner for display data. So those dots are actually the data points for each treatment, or for the plots here in the data column. So that can be helpful if you're looking for outliers, trying to see where we ended up with that mean. You can certainly turn them off if you just want to look at the mean here. The other option was subsample values. In this case, I don't have any subsamples, but if you did want to see a dot for each individual subsample value, that's the different options there of what you display versus just having it summarized at the plot level of what the assessment was. We can also see the labels that we had generated. So we have a right label and a left label. When ARM had asked us, we had the pest code selected. So you can see that ended up being, what should I use for the right label? We'll see in the options here real soon that we can change those. What actually gets built, or you can even hand type in them. And then we have an overall title at the top. This is just my header. So that came from the header in this trial. You can tell that this is just an example study. It's not a real one, so the title isn't very descriptive, but it would be kind of the title of your overall trial. Typically gets filled in there. And then the bottom label as well, in this case, has the trial ID. So what's kind of helpful to do is we have this graph here, and if we want to consider what should we change about it, make some small tweaks in the options, is now at the bottom we can open up the options, and it will leave the graph kind of behind here. So something that can be kind of useful as you learn and want to tweak what options and how the graph might display. For example, maybe I want to see how a horizontal bar graph would look. I can make changes on the graph options. And if I just press the Apply Now button, back behind here, you'll see the graph actually redraws based on what we've changed. So that can be a helpful workflow just to keep the graph options window open and then see behind there what changes you're making. I'll set that back to vertical, and then again, it was just the Apply Now helps us to visualize the change that we just made. And we'll do that a lot here today to show these different options. So going through the different sections, I have a fonts section here, pretty straightforward. The different text that we see on the graph, we can control here on this tab what the size is, as well as the font itself. So the apply to, you can just choose, okay, which component are you pointed at? So maybe this legend text we think is a little small. Then you can come down to the font and click the drop-down box, and now you can select and configure that font. So maybe in this case, I want it bold and maybe just a little bigger. And then I can apply now. And maybe it's stuck because I have the, just put it on the legend. Let me try maybe the graph title. Let's make that even bigger. So maybe we go up to 16 and I want to underline it as well. I can turn that on here. So we'll just configure and adjust whichever component of the graph that we're looking at. Moving on to the labels. So this will be the x-axis labels. So again, our treatments in this case that were grouped by. And so here ARM has pre-filled these with the information from our treatments editor, specifically the treatment name, the rate unit, the rate and the rate unit. And then in this case, I had two different components. So it just repeated and pulled both components together and just combined them with a, looks like it's a semicolon. If I want to choose different fields, there's a reselect button. So ARM will ask, well, what pieces of information are you interested in? And so maybe I just need the treatment name. Maybe I don't need the rate unit because I always work on the same unit or something like that. You can see it adjusts then what information has been filled in. You can also hand type. So if I did just want to simplify this, maybe the NIS is pretty irrelevant anyway, and so that's all I need. You can certainly adjust that text there. Again, if I apply now, one thing to note that this text here, we just rebuilt, we can change it. It actually is also linked to the trial map. So this prompt here is telling us we have changed that labeled text for the treatments. We can save those changes also to the trial map. And so I'm going to say no, and we'll say we just wanted to make this change on the graph. And we'll I can show where that is. If you've been in the trial map editor before, there's a treatment description section. And so that is very similar to what we saw here with these labels. It's information from the treatments editor that you can choose what gets built and put in there. It's typically it's copied once you generate the protocol, it gets copied to that spot. So if you do make some changes to your treatment editor in the trial, after the trial map's been set up, that text was copied across so it doesn't automatically update. So sometimes we have people that say, well, this is wrong. I changed one of the treatment names. We had to change it or something, and now it's not showing up right. It's just a matter of doing the reselect here, either in the graphing or on the trial map to refresh that information to what it currently is in the treatments list. So those are kind of linked, but they can be separate. The same thing will happen then if you continue to change this, it'll just ask so that if you want to have this description also be used on that trial map, then that was really what ARM was asking us. And I said, no, we'll just leave the trial map description separate, so that's just fine. So those are the labels. Here we do have the x-axis as legend. So this is the very same option that we have on the main window. We just kind of brought it out to the main window since it's so common, but you can certainly turn it on and off here. So now if I apply now, you'll notice since we did shorten our text, we can get away, it's much easier to fit that then on our graph. So that's kind of two options. If it's too hard to simplify the text, then it works pretty good as a label. But if it is possible, you can always do some shorthand work here in these labels to get the text to fit nicely on the graph. A couple of other options that we see on this window. Let me move this over a little bit. We do have mean comparison letters up at the top here. So this would be the letters you would see if you generated an AOV means table for this column. We can actually bring that analysis onto the graph and see that separation there. And so that is controlled with the display AOV mean comparisons. So I can turn that off if I don't want to see those. There is a sub option to choose where those show up. So here, if I keep that off, it'll put it right at the data point here with the bar. We also have data labels, so that would be your treatment mean in this case. So if I turn those off, you'll see that it's that numeric value there. So if I were to, maybe I'll turn those all off, then we can really simplify just down to bars and error. The error bar is on right now. We'll get to those a little later. I kind of like having the data labels on there to see what that value is. But a lot of options. This options button here will just take you to the AOV report options, because that's what we will use as far as your mean comparison test, your significance level, things like that. Those are all tied to the options you currently have selected in your print reports. So that button here will just bring up that dialog so you can adjust those statistical parameters for generating those mean comparison letters. All right, so the next section here is the legends. So in this case, we don't have a whole lot. This will be a little more useful when we do the multi-column example. So I'll move on to the titles and we'll come back and see that a little later. So the titles, we kind of showed where each of those are. This is where that text is put down. Again, it's copied from the trial, but we can always adjust this if we want. Maybe in this case, I want to make an adjustment from my overall header. The bottom title, maybe I don't even want to have anything there, so I can just clear it out. And again, the left title and the right title, kind of similar to the treatment labels. We can choose what information matters. What do we want ARM to fill in? So here I'll just choose the fields to include. And currently we have the rating type and the rating unit being included to describe the assessment. So maybe that's a good selection there that we would like, or we can of course always adjust it. Right title, maybe in this case, we don't even need. We always work with the same pest, so I don't even need that. So we can always turn that off. So there I cleared out, I emptied out the bottom title text, so that disappeared. And then we hid the right title entirely. So a lot of options to really fine tune what gets put on the graph and what doesn't, and then also the text itself. Whether you're hand typing or having ARM build that, pull the information from the trial, from the column that you're looking at into the graph. And the common theme here. So on the axis, this is really looking at the scale that we have to put the data on, and some of the options maybe for the axis as well. And so we can kind of turn on grid marks. Maybe if you want to have these, maybe for a line graph that would make sense to have the vertical grids. If you don't like the horizontal grids at all, you can always turn those off. So again, pretty much every component that we have here on the graph, you can adjust. Just a matter of kind of finding it. You can adjust the different tick marks as well that appear for like your y-axis. From a data standpoint, probably the most significant option on this window would be the y-axis scale. So here, ARM kind of chose it for us. Of course, we want it to be at 0, and then it'll just, based on the data, it'll adjust. So here, 0 to 50 made a lot of sense. But if you do have a specific range you want to specify, user-defined can be helpful. So if this assessment were to be a percent, let's say, and actually the visualization we would want to be from 0 to 100, for example, you can certainly adjust that. So you can just choose the user-defined and put in your range, or have ARM just select the kind of the most logical, and it'll just grab the kind of the range that we have of the data and give us the what fits the best, basically based on that. So that, and actually probably a good time to show, since I have the zero origin selected, you know, we've really been zeroed in on this one set of data. This was data column number 1. It's actually pretty easy to move in between between your different data columns. So here on the main graph window, there's a next column button. And so here I've moved to data column 2. Not a lot going on. They're all zeros, but I can move to data column 3 and it will display the graph. And you'll just notice, since we were talking about the axis, now it's 0 to 35. So that zero origin is pretty nice because it will just adjust automatically based on the data range that we have as I go back and forth. The user defined will just always have that same range, so you may be changing it a little more often if you do that. So you can just go next and previous, and again, we're just switching between this trial. I've only got 3 data columns. There's not a lot going on, but you were just switching between the columns and drawing the graph based on all of our options. All right, so that was the axis options. Moving on to the colors. Just like pretty much everything else we've looked at, we can adjust the colors on the components here for the graph. And so again, this apply to, we're just kind of look at, well, what component are you looking at? What piece of this graph do you want to adjust? And so, you know, maybe this top title, here's my graph title. So I can choose if I don't want that blue background. Really, once you select the apply to, there is one or both the foreground color, which is usually the text, or the line itself. You know, if you're looking at the axis, it would be the line itself that's drawn. And then in this case, for the title, there's also the background color. Since we have this whole box, really, that is the graph, or is the title there. So you can adjust the background color. Maybe I don't really want a background color, so I'll just set it to a white, and then that will make that blue go away. I still have a drop shadow, so I could turn that background style off, and now it actually will really kind of take away that box essentially, and now you just have the text itself. If you wanted to change the axis color for some reason, if black wasn't working and you wanted blue instead, you know, that's a little hard to see the difference. It's so thin. I'm changing the color here of just that line for whatever reason. Really, each and every component is selectable here to change the color, whether it's the foreground or the background. You've got lots of options to customize. And actually, the legend here, if you want to change the bars themselves, the assignment is over here. So I've got the identify the untreated in this fashion, but these other treatment numbers here, you can adjust the color over here on the Legends tab. So if instead of this green, I wanted purple, you can see it will just adjust the treatment color there. All right, finally, the error bar. This guy's been hanging out here because I've had the standard error turned on. Certainly, you can just turn off that error bar if you'd like, but there's a variety of different error bars you can draw, just depending on what it is you would want to show. I think standard error is usually the one I hear most questions about. How can I turn on the standard error? You can have standard deviation, percent value, all sorts of you can even do a user defined the plus and minus for each treatment and really manually set what error bars you'd want to use. So lots of options there as well for the error bar, and that does work for the bar graph and the line graph if you want it, I believe. All right, so that is kind of a quick rundown of the options that we have for the graph. I do want to show then an example for the multi-column. So I'm going to go back to the options here. And so we've really focused here on the single data column. Certainly, if we want to generate a graph with more than one column, we could just close the graph window and do a new graph and walk through those steps again. There is also a reselect data button here on the graph options. So this will accomplish kind of the same thing. We'll kind of go back to the starting point, that little wizard where ARM asked us what components we want to build the graph. But this way we don't actually have to close the graph, and we'll just reselect the data. So we're back here at the treatments editor. Maybe I'll clear and just pick them in their traditional order here, 1 through 4. And then we'll be asked what columns to display on the graph. And in this case, now I'm going to want to include both column 1 and 3. My example here I rigged up, it was a stand count that we took a week later, a week apart. So maybe we want to compare the difference here. Probably the application occurred either on that 9th or somewhere in between here. And so we can kind of compare what happened once our treatments were applied. So when I select more than one column, ARM will kind of confirm what is it you want to do here. So we can, if we press yes, we will get one graph with 2 columns, and that is what we want to do. The other option is if you just want to look at individual graphs, like we had done before with the next and previous buttons, then you can click no, and then this will just help you to minimize. In my case, I had that column number 2 that was pretty worthless. I wasn't going to graph anything with that, but it was just kind of getting in the way. So this would be a case if I was wanting to generate a graph from one data column, but I wanted to look across the particular range of columns that I selected, then no would be handy for that. But in this case, yes, indeed, I do want to create a single graph with 2 data columns. So we'll press yes here. And again, it's asking us for the header fields for the labels. This will be the left label. If you recall, before we had both the rating type and the rating unit was kind of our differentiation, the most important thing for us. In this case, really, I think what matters more is actually, it could be the rating date in this case, since we're combining 2 different columns. I'll just keep the default here, and we'll see exactly which label that is on the graph. So we're back here at the graph options, and we've reselected the data. So I just have to hit apply now to see the change here on the graph. So now we're back to our long options here. So let me turn on the x-axis labels so that it's a little easier to see. We have 2 data sets now. So we have the column number 1 and the column number 2 side by side for each treatment. So we can see what has happened in each one. And it looks like our label that we would have is on the left, so we can always adjust that if we wanted. We call it there in the options that we can always readjust that with the legend here. So this is selecting the fields. So still, do we really want the rating type and unit to be here? Maybe it's just the unit in this case, because really we're just graphing the number of plants that we've counted. So maybe we only want plant to be our label. Actually, I think that is now our legend up here. So that actually should be our data column. Here, let me say okay. I think I have two legends on top of each other actually. So we've got, yep, we have a legend already here. So let me go back to my options. Yep, so that's actually the legend here. Right now we have plant and plant. That doesn't tell us the difference. And that's because we've grabbed the rating unit for both of those columns were the same. So really the difference in our two data columns that we're graphing is really the rating date instead. Or maybe the treatment interval. We could certainly use that as well, but I'll just use the date in this case. So now we can see what actually matters here. In our case, column number 1 is on April 9th, and then column number 2 is April 16th. So we can compare, in this case, that difference in time for our plant count, which looks like my data. I must have just threw in some nonsense numbers because we didn't do very well over time. Our weeds are actually increasing. So that's really the advantage here of the multi-column graph. Certainly we can do that with a bar or a line graph. If I hit apply now, we can see that. In this case, it wouldn't make a lot of sense to have the treatments here with the line because that's not going to be the trend. But we do have an option for grouping. So here we've grouped by treatments, but instead we could group by data column. Since our two different data columns are by time. So here now we're kind of showing the trend based on the different treatments of what has been occurring. It looks like I have the same purple for the two different colors here, so I could change the check. Maybe I'll make that the red there. So now they each are a different color. So again, the line graph's kind of helpful for time oriented. If I had 8 data columns, if we did this every week for a couple of months, I would be able to see a really nice trend as to, in this case, it's the control that the different treatments were able to accomplish, how many plants are out there in the plot at those different time sets. In this case, there's not a whole lot of excitement here since we just have the two data points. But again, that was the grouping. So just depending on the data you're trying to graph, pivoting that really makes a difference as to what you're trying to visualize. And it kind of fits in line with if you're doing like an AUDPC or a repeated measures type of analysis, being able to see that graphing. And actually, if you've used the AUDPC calculation before, if you graph that AUDPC column, ARM will actually generate this type of line graph kind of automatically across the data that you selected to calculate. If you're not familiar with the AUDPC, that acronym is Area Under Disease Progress Curve. So it's kind of looking, if you can imagine several more data points, you're really just kind of summing up. In this case, the check would have a large value as you were, if you were to shade in this shape here and kind of summing that whole area across that time stretch. And so the check would be a much larger number because the area is much bigger than, say, our treatment number 4, which was much smaller. So you get an overall sense across that time series, that time, the different assessments that you took, then you can get an idea of how much either control or lack of control that you had in that treatment. You have a question here on the error bar, how the percent, so there is a percent value that you can put there. There is an option to do a percent value in the error bar. So is it possible to customize as like the APOC or the percent of control? So I believe for the error bar, this percent is really just it would be the percent for the data point. So for example, if I took 25% of the 32, just looking at this one data point here, then we would have the error bar size would be 4 plus or minus. Of course, this is very ugly, so it's a little hard to see how bad it ended up. But I believe that's really what it would be doing for us. Maybe if I shrink this down to 10, a little easier to see, and then our axis. Oops, turned on the wrong ones, the y-axis. So 32 and then a 10% error bar on 32 would be about 3.2. So it'd be 29 versus 35. So that's roughly what it's doing. So it is, yeah, so it's just kind of a flat percent. If you wanted to incorporate your APOC or the those Abbott calculations that you can get on the report, I think what you could do if you wanted to would be the user defined. Now that one's it's a little hard. I could demonstrate that, but essentially, if I just click the plus data, it will for each treatment number, you just type in the value that you would want on the plus side and also on the minus side. So that would be one way. If you had those Abbott percents, you could kind of manually create them, but probably a little clunky. So, but really great question. All right, let's turn off those error bars so we can gain some sanity back on what that's showing. So, yeah, great question. All right, so that was the multi-column example. So I guess that that overall kind of covers the first two graphing types, I would say. I do kind of want to cover some of the box whisker. To do that, actually, I'm going to cancel and close this graph. So the box whisker fits like any of the other ones. Of course, we can just do a graph and create a new graph and just change the type to a box whisker. There's also a shortcut for the box whisker because that is a common tool for the data review process. So also on the properties panel, when you're looking at your data, there's a button here in this tools section for the box whisker. So that's a real quick shortcut. And I'll do it one more time here. I'm clicked into the data column that I am looking at, and then pressing the box whisker button will just immediately pop open the box whisker graph. So that's a nice shortcut. It just includes all the treatments that we have and whatever options of what we were just last in the graphing. But of course, we can still adjust the options if we need. And in this case, I think I'm going to put our x-axis as a legend, so that way we can see the data a little better. And just real quick, I'll just kind of run through what the box whisker shows us if you're not familiar with the box whisker. Actually, let me turn off my treatment mean point to start with. So kind of the traditional box whisker here will draw the median, not the mean, but the median here. And then the box height is the interquartile range, I think is the technical term. It's your 75th percentile and the 25th percentile of your data points. So if I display my data points, that might help visualize it a little bit better here. So I've only got 5 data points. So there's not a whole ton of them. So that's kind of how we end up in between data points. But really, it's the range of the 25th and 75th percentile as the kind of the bulk of your data points, essentially for the data. And then the whiskers extend out to the largest and the smallest points. Here, this one's maybe a better example of the whiskers. The smallest and the largest points in the data set is where the whiskers extend to. And the only case where it doesn't extend out to the largest or the smallest is if there's an outlier. And I don't have any in this column. Let me go over. Oh, I don't have any here either. So maybe we can rig up an outlier here. Maybe treatment number 3 would be a good example. Let's just cherry pick, and I'm just going to totally adjust the data just to try to make an outlier. And I did not, probably we don't have enough data points perhaps to really make the outliers. So let me we just undo that change. So an outlier would be calculated. The box whisker definition has a specific calculation for an outlier. It would take the height of the box, multiply that by 1.5. So you really have a box and a half worth of height. And if a data point is that much away from the median, then that would tell you that it's an outlier. So of course, if you only have, in my case, I've got 5 data points. So if I have a point that's really high or really low, it also makes the box really tall. So you see more of those outliers if you had more data points. So maybe it could have been, we could have probably found them if we had subsamples or more replicates. That would be a little easier to see. But it would just display as an X then on the graph. So if I was able to make one, there would just be a little X way above here, and the whisker could still remain in that spot. So that's kind of how the box whisker is calculated. The use of that graph, it's a nice visualization. If you look at the different box heights, it gives you just a good feel for the amount of variation in each treatment. So that's in the data review flow, you're looking to see the assumptions of AOV, and one of those assumptions is that the variance with each treatment is similar. You don't have to be identical, but similar. And so you're really looking at the amount of variation. So the box whisker is a nice way to see, yeah, these all have more or less the same variation. So I bet that would pass that test. So that's a good visualization. Another tool you can use, and I'm going to turn on the treatment point again, or the treatment mean point. And so I'll just use the treatment number 4 as an example. So again, the middle, the solid line is your median, and the dashed line is your mean. So if your data is perfectly balanced, those two would be pretty much on top of each other. So treatment 2 is pretty balanced. There's hardly a difference there. They're pretty much right at the same point. Whereas for this purple one, there is a little bit of a difference. So you see that the mean is a little higher than the median. And so that gives you a sense of the skewness. And so since the median doesn't really get pulled one way or the other when you have an extreme value, the median is still kind of in the middle, because that's the middle point of all the data points. And so the mean, however, as you have a large value, that can get pulled one way or the other. And so this would tell me with the higher mean, it tells me that there is a data point that's making the skewness. And this, in this case, it's a little farther out there, a little larger value. And we can see this data point here. It's over 20. It's around 25 or something, quite a bit higher than the rest of the little data points down here. And so that's showing us that skewness, because the mean is getting pulled up because of that larger data point compared to the median. So we have a little bit of skewness in this treatment, whereas treatment 2 looks like it's very nice and balanced. So that's kind of another usage for that box whisker graph. We won't go into all the statistical ramifications, but this is a very, very useful tool for looking at the data and visualizing what you have here. All right, so that kind of covers all the different graphing options, the graph types that we have, and kind of configuring the graph to appear the way you would like. We do have a few different options for then using this graph. So now how do we utilize the graph? What can we do with this? And so on this main window here, we have a clipboard button. So either the word clipboard down here, or in the top corner, there's also a shortcut button with the two sheets of paper for the clipboard. This is really the fastest way to take what you see within ARM and use it somewhere else. So for example, maybe I'll open up a Word document, and I'm in the middle of some sort of write-up, and I just want to include that graph in my document. That clipboard button basically just takes a picture of the graph as it appears on my screen and puts it on the clipboard, so you can paste it into Word. You could paste it into PowerPoint. You could paste it into an email draft that you have. You notice once you do that, you can adjust the size of that picture, but the individual components, there's no more editing. We've really output that into just a flat picture that can be used somewhere else. So that, again, clipboard is real great once you have it looking the way you want. And I use the screenshot example because you can, as you change the shape of your window, that does affect how this is output. So now I've made it a little bit skinnier, and as I use my clipboard, probably shouldn't have closed my Word here. Another blank document. So when I paste, you can see that shape matches. So just the way that looks right in ARM is exactly what you'll get when you use that clipboard to take it to another location. So clipboard, that's the fastest, quick and easy, just basically a copy and paste to something else. We do have a save and a save as here. So if we press the save button, that's going to create a GRF8. So that file basically is the graph that we've generated for this trial, saved to a file format that ARM can read. So if I'm still putting in data, maybe that time series that we were looking at where we picked 2 different data columns, but I still have 2 more weeks where I have to go out and do assessments. So I'll be filling in more data. then I could save the graph because I wanted to see how things looked, save this grf8 graph, and I can return and open up that graph again with this trial. And it will then update the data. Of course, I've updated my data, added more, whatever. Then I'll be able to use that again. Comparing that to, if you go into the options, there is a save set. So this is a GDF8. You don't really need to worry probably too much about the extension, but just know that within the graph options, we're really saving a graph option set. So if you've done that with like reporting before, where you configure all of the options to make this nice report, and then you can save a file with all of those options so you can use it again and again in different trials. It's really the same thing here with the graph. We're taking all of the options, that whole configuration that we just chose to make this nice graph. Let's save all of those options. So that way, when I come back a week later, a month later, next year, when I'm doing this same process of graphing, I can just start with the same set of options again. That's really what we're saving here with the graph options set. So that's real helpful for, let's put a pin in this. This is perfect. This is the type of graph I want to create again and again for whatever output I have. This is what I use in my slides or for my final report. Awesome. So save that set. So all of those options that I chose can be used again and again. You can just give it a name to remind yourself of what that's useful for. And again, the save over here was really tied to this one trial. I'm going to come back to this trial again and see my updated data and generate a graph again. The save as is more of an output here. We can save the image. So saving it to the clipboard was really what we did with the clipboard button. So the save as is a way to save the image to a file. So I can choose a variety of image formats, whether it's a bitmap, JPEG, PNG. I haven't worked a whole lot with an EMF, GIF, TIFF. These are kind of common image formats that you can save the graph image to. So again, this is just a flat image, just like we pasted into the Word document. This will save the image as a file, which you could then import with any other tool. So this will save us that PNG file, and we can choose what folder it gets put to if we want. But again, that's really flattening the image. Can't really adjust any of the components anymore. But now you have that file that can be used somewhere else. One more output example. It's actually using the clipboard, but just kind of I want to highlight a capability that I think can be kind of hidden a little bit in ARM. This graph here, let's say this is really a real great summary for what happened in the trial. You can use the clipboard button to copy that image and actually utilize one of the rich text fields in the ARM trial. So maybe let's say this is one of the, a great visualization for my conclusions. So I can go into my site description and my conclusions and, the treatments performed as expected, blah, 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 whatever conclusion you have there, you can actually paste in the picture. And what will happen in this case is it will take that picture that's right now on the clipboard. When we paste it in, it'll actually save it as a file and attach it to the trial. So you can use the clipboard and paste it in. You could also do that save as I did a second ago, and create the image but then you have to kind of attach it here in the RTF. So ARM can kind of do both steps all in one spot, just using the clipboard and paste it in. Now it'll create that file and attach it, and we'll bring it in to the site description field. So in this case, it's that nice kind of overall conclusions. I could resize this, do whatever I would want, put in more information, and this can be really great for reporting as well then. So if I were to want to print out my site description, I'll just do the standard form and should show up on my preview here since it's just the second section. And that image will be included on this report because the site description is just showing the contents of all of our fields in the site description, including that conclusions where we just put in that image. It looks like it's just taking a moment here with the preview. That pasting in that picture can take a little bit more time to render that. And I'm sure since my computer is also sharing my screen with you all, it's probably going to take just a little bit longer to generate. There we go. So here's my report, and it's showing all of the fields. So it does include that picture then. So that's a nice way to sneak in a graph into the reporting of ARM by including that image, that graph in one of the rich text fields. All right. Well, that is all I have. Does anyone have any questions? I appreciate everyone joining us today. I got a couple more minutes here before the top of the hour. If you're typing away, I won't shut things down immediately. But to respect people's time, certainly, if there aren't any questions, thanks for joining us. Hopefully, we'll see you at a future webinar, and we'll be sure to send the recording here later on today. So thanks everybody. And I'll hang on here for another minute or two if there are questions. So thanks.